Good afternoon, everyone. So I do recognise some faces in the room, but I'm Professor Katie Laird from De Montfort University, and I've been working in the textile stroke microbiology arena for at least 10 years now. And today I'm going to give you an overview of some of the latest research that we've done, and it relates very much to domestic laundering of healthcare uniforms, or the implications for that. Previously, if you've heard me speak, it may have been more on the industrial laundering side. So we're going to look at the survival of bacteria on textiles as a general introduction, and then I'm going to talk to you about the domestic washing machine and the research that we've been doing around this. Now, we did start this 10 years ago, and we didn't have the response necessarily that we wanted, and we'll see how it goes this time. We're going to look at how domestic laundry machines can contribute to antibiotic resistance, and also we've done some research now on bed sheets and bed sheet changing policies. So we're going to have a look at some of that. So generally, it is well known that bacteria can survive on surfaces. And in the hospital environment, hard surface, non-porous surface have got risk management systems, etc. in place, as has bed sheets and scrubs that go to industrial launderers. However, when it comes to your healthcare uniforms, that's okay. You can take those home. They don't count in the rest of it. So what I'm going to start off with is just the basic microbiology of why actually textiles can be fomites for pathogens. So here we've literally got, let's put some bacteria on some cotton and polyester and let's see how long it survives for. So what you're seeing there is that the green line's the S. aureus, so Staphylococcus on cotton, and the blue line is the E. coli. And you can see that merrily going along there for 21 days. So that's how far we went up to. And we think with the cotton, there's a nice supply of nutrients and it's got some water content and the bacteria are quite happy there. So they can survive on textiles for an extended period of time, as you would see on hard surfaces within the hospital environment. Polyester's slightly different. So we did the E. coli and the Staphylococcus on the polyester again. They do survive, but for a shorter period of time, so around a week. And the reason we believe that this is happening is that you haven't got the nutrients, you haven't got the water, and the bacteria is very much sitting on the surface because it's a polymer, it's a plastic effectively, is sitting on the surface. But what you often see is that the bacteria are much more transferable from that polyester, whereas they're more absorbed in the cotton, so we maybe don't see as much transference to other surfaces. And just to prove that we're not making it up, we have some images of the bacteria on the surface of those textiles. So what you can see, I'm going to shout, I'm going to come away from the microphone a little bit, is that you can see the polyester is very much sitting as individual cells on the surface, whereas when we look at the cotton, you'll get much more clumping and more embedding in the fibre. So they are behaving differently on different fibres. So we might say, well, that's great because we can look at fibre choice for reducing the bacteria on the surface. However, it's not that simple because when we did the work on coronavirus, we were basically seeing the opposite to this. So we were seeing much more transference, again from the polyester, but we were seeing longer survival on the polyester because it was sitting on the surface, whereas with the cotton, it was being absorbed and then desiccating. So although it looks like fibre type could be a solution for bacteria, it is the opposite effect with viruses. So there isn't necessarily a one-fits-all. So my view on that is if we can launder properly and we can disinfect properly, are we needing to have antimicrobial surfaces, etc., or coatings, I should say, rather than surfaces on textiles? And I haven't got an answer for that. It's just a question because we can disinfect textiles. So this was some of the original research that we did about 8 years ago on looking at the transmission of bacteria within the domestic machine. So what was happening in the domestic machine when we were laundering with known bacteria being there. So again, we went for E. coli and Staphylococcus, and the reason we've done that is one's a gram positive and one's a gram negative. So for those of you that have not got a microbiology background, it means their structures are slightly different. So by having those two different structures, we were looking at a more broader range of behaviour in the microorganisms. So we took some sterile fabric swatches, we inoculated them with the two microorganisms, we put them into a domestic machine at 40 degrees and at 60 degrees, we put in some sterile swatches and we had a look what was happening. And basically at 60 degrees, we were seeing elimination of the microorganisms, which is what the policy says, 60 degrees with detergent should remove most microorganisms. However, when we're looking at 40 degrees, it's a whole different picture. So we're seeing the survival of about 4.5 logs of the microorganism. But the scary thing is, because when we're thinking about a washing machine that's basically just agitating and removing the microorganisms from the textiles, it was just being passed to the sterile textiles in the wash. So all it was really doing was just swishing it all around a bit. So what you're seeing here on the last 4 bars is that what the sterile textile come out looking like, and you can just see from a sort of 10 to the 8, if we had 10 to the 8 to begin with, it's just being transferred onto the other surface. So at 40 degrees, it's just moving around in the wash and it's surviving very readily. And the question there is, are all nurses taking their uniforms home and washing at 60? If they are washing at 60, then you would think, oh, that's great, they're working. But we're going to show you some more data that basically says even if you're washing at 60, you're most probably not. So don't just take my word for this, because there's a whole wealth of studies that have been published here on survival of microorganisms on textiles. So it's not just me saying it. There's a whole wealth of people over a number of years that actually are saying textiles need to be considered here. Excuse me. So that's just some there. And then we've got other ones that have looked at the transmission of microorganisms as well. So I just wanted to let you know it wasn't just me standing here saying that. There is lots of other people saying the same thing and are doing similar research. And this is transfer. So the porcine skin, the pig skin, is a model for what skin contact would be looking like. And we're doing some research later on in the year with the UK HSA to establish that skin textile transfer a little bit more. And you've got there from stainless steel, from vinyl flooring, passed on by textiles. So it is, microorganisms are able to transfer from textiles to other surfaces. So I put the question out there to you, are all nurses washing at 60? Is it reasonable in this day and age with environmental impact, with the cost of living, to expect uniforms to go into a wash at 60 degrees on their own with nothing else and launder them safely? And even if someone is doing that, how is that performance really occurring within the domestic washing machines? Are the domestic washing machines working as we think they are? So we decided to do a larger study at actually looking at performance rather than just the transfer. So in the last 5 years, I've been working on a new test standard for 14065, which is the industrial laundry risk management system. So that test method involves using bioindicators within the wash to assess decontamination for the industrial laundry. So that's currently being put into that test standard, but it is a test standard that directly says this laundering system, this commercial machine, industrial machine, domestic machine, whichever one you may be using, kills this amount of bacteria. So we use that method there, and what you're seeing here is the bioindicator and it's got different amounts of bacteria contained. So it's a textile with the bacteria on, contained within a membrane, so that the detergent, the water, the temperature is able to get to the bacteria, but the bacteria is not able to get out. So we are just measuring kill in the wash, not dilution, because dilution still means the bacteria is there, as I showed when I showed you the 40 degrees wash one. So we were then looking at the 60-degree washes, because this is meant to be what we're doing with our uniforms when we take them home. And we looked at the full-length wash, but then we also looked at eco and rapid washes, because if you're anything like me, when the kids come home and everything else, and you're trying to get through it all, and someone needs a rugby kit and someone else needs horse-riding trousers, and they're just whipped in, aren't they, and done a quick wash, and they come out and they look clean enough for whatever it is they're doing. We just don't have time. But we also looked at biological and non-biological detergents. So we tried to look at a range of parameters of washing machines to see what was going on. And I recruited most of my team in this because I wanted people to use the machines who knew the microbiology as well, so they all loved me, and the bedsheet study that were going on, so there were things. So we all had a range of different machines, different models, and a nice range of ages on the machines as well within the team, which was really quite helpful because that gave us some more knowledge. So we had a look at this range of washing machines, and so we looked at the full length cycles first of all, and as you can see here from the cycle lengths, they really vary between different machines. So you've got two there actually that are just under 2 hours, and another that's 3 hours, 5 minutes. I'm not sure I could wait 3 hours, 5 minutes for a wash, but anyway. And what you can also see here is the holding times of those temperatures, because if that washing machine's only reaching 60 degrees for a few minutes, like 2 or 3 minutes, it's not going to decontaminate. It has to be there for 10 minutes. So of those machines, only 3 were actually reaching a holding time where we thought there'd be any disinfection. And there was 3 that weren't, obviously. So at this point, we're thinking, right, well, there's already 50% of our machines that we've just chosen at random that are not reaching the temperature they need. Let me go back. But also, look at the temperatures, the peak temperatures. This machine on the end's just performing at 20 degrees. I have to say, this team member got a new washing machine after this study. But he had no idea, and I think that's the point, isn't it? If you're washing at home and you've turned your dial to 60 degrees, you presume that your machine is getting to 60 degrees. Well, as this shows, actually, none of them quite reached 60 degrees, or they were in maybe a standard deviation where we could say it was acceptable. But of the ones that did reach 60 degrees, 2 of them didn't reach the holding time to be of disinfection. So this is just 6 people at random. So this is quite worrying, really. You see it's 20 degrees still here. It didn't matter what temperature you put it on. So this was the eco cycle. So these were the shorter cycles. Again, some of them were still quite long, even on the rapid cycles. But what we saw was we only then had 2 machines that were holding the temperature for long enough. And we started, I'm hoping this is going to bring up some more red lines here. No, it's not. Okay. But we only had, you can see 1, 2, 3 machines are now not reaching anywhere near the temperature. So as those cycles are shortened, the temperatures are not being met and the time is not being met. And it's just increasing. So these rapid cycles are really not reaching the temperatures that we need. So we were saying that approximately 50% of the machines that failed to reach time and temperature to disinfect. And you may say, well, that's quite a small sample, but I was talking to the UK HSA and they've done a much wider study with the similar data, and their number was the same, approximately 50% of machines out there. You're all going to be going testing your washing machines now, aren't you, when you get home? So that's fine. Okay, so you say, right, we're not reaching the length of temperature, we're not reaching the time we need, but is it still disinfecting? So the next step was to use the bioindicators that I mentioned, And we used a microorganism called Enterococcus because it's thermal tolerant. So this is your worst case scenario. So we were looking at worst case scenario. And also the strain we're using, we know has a reasonable tolerance to disinfectants as well. So we knew that is your worst case. And we looked at the same machines. We always knew this one that was only at 20 degrees was going to fail miserably. But anyway... and we looked at the full length and we looked at the rapid length again, and we looked at biological and non-biological detergent. Well, that's the picture. It's just not disinfecting, and it can be quite random which ones are. So some of them are passing on the full length cycle, but then are not passing the disinfection reduction on the rapid cycles. And then you've got two machines that are just failing across the board. But they were reaching lower temperatures. So the red is where we had no log reductions or not enough log reduction to be classed as disinfection. And the green is where we're saying, right, it passed. It had a 5 to 6 log reduction. So it's not a very good picture when we've just chose randomly 6 machines to see what's happening. So what we're really saying with this, it doesn't matter if you're taking your uniforms home and washing it as you think you should be, won't necessarily be working, and you won't even know it's not working, because unless you're monitoring your temperature in your machine, etc., you've got no way of telling. You're just trusting it's doing as it should be. And what we also found when we looked at this study was that it's those older machines. Once they're above 4 years, they stop performing as well. So what we then did was had a look at the pipe that goes behind the detergent drawer and the rubber. And don't worry too much about this. What this is basically saying is it is a hub for a whole range of different bacteria. So our domestic machines basically had that whole range of different genus of bacteria in the washing machine. Which you may or may not expect, but there was a lot of different types of bacteria being harboured in the washing machine. And then what we did was said, well, are they antibiotic resistant? And these are the genes that we found within those domestic washing machines. And what you can see there is a lot of them are antibiotic efflux pumps, which we'd associate with detergent, pumping detergents and things out. And as you can see, some of these are associated with detergent resistant, disinfectant agent resistance. So what you're seeing is that these efflux pumps in these microorganisms are being harboured in the washing machine, and they're very much associated with disinfection and those chemicals that are going in the machine, e.g. the detergents. So that was slightly scary as well. There was an interesting pattern coming out of there. So then we thought, right, okay, we know the machines are not performing. We know that people are washing their domestic uniforms at home. They're potentially taking their uniforms back with the microorganisms on them. And we know the machines have got antibiotic resistance harbouring in there. So how could this be happening? So what we did is we decided to try and see with non-biological, because the biological with the enzymes would confuse the picture a little bit, was look to see if we could induce resistance to a very well-known brand of washing powder and liquid. Same brand on both of them. Won't mention the brand. And we basically put the microorganism in a sublethal dose of the detergent. How many of you know the volume of water going into your machine, the weight of your load going into your machine, so that you're able to calculate the amount of detergent you're meant to put in the machine? No. Are you like me? You go like that, yeah, that'll do, and shove it in, yeah, and off it goes. I'm not a fan, believe it or not, I'm not a fan of washing and ironing. It's like I'm doing it at work. I don't want to do it at home as well. Particularly ironing. I really don't like ironing. But anyway, so what we tried to do was we tried to induce resistance to the domestic detergents in this method. I won't go into the method too much, but basically it was just keep subjecting it to sublethal doses of this domestic detergent, and could we increase it and make it tolerant? And the answer was yes, we could. So we looked at where the inhibition rate was. So we had the initial inhibition rate, and we took 80% inhibition as our starting point so that we knew it was sublethal. And then we started to increase the concentrations, and we used Staphylococcus, Klebsiella and Pseudomonas as the microorganisms we tried to do this. We tried to get a range of pathogens. And as you can see, we could increase the concentration, well, by over 1.5 million fold on one of them. So we were developing strains that were then resistant to our domestic detergent. So we had a look and saw if there was cross-resistance to the antibiotics, and the answer is yes. So if a microorganism has never been in contact with an antibiotic before, but has repeatedly been in contact with a sublethal concentration of domestic detergent, it can gain cross-resistance to the antibiotics. And that's reasonably scary. So what you're seeing here, I'll come over again, is green is where it's susceptible, this is your intermediate, and this is your resistance. So you can see that even if they're not becoming fully resistant, they're all moving in that direction. So that was for Pseudomonas. Klebsiella again, look at how some of these are changing for some antibiotics. There's a significant shift, and they've never been in contact with the antibiotics, between the starting point and those strains that become resistant to the detergent. And more scarily was the Staphylococcus aureus, where we'd actually taken, we had an MSSA strain to begin with, and by the time we'd finished, it was an MRSA strain. And I think there we can see all of the produced clinically relevant resistances after only having subjected to domestic detergent. So this paper is being published today, actually. It's been under press embargo, so it's going to be in +1. It's going to be open access, so you can all access it. And I'm hoping there will be some press releases around this. So we then just looked at the genes and tried to see what it was that was causing this, and we found 2 genes that were involved. So this is more for blue sky research, but we wanted to understand exactly why it was happening. And they're the genes that are associated with the efflux pumps, which is very similar to what we were isolating within the domestic machines that we swabbed as well. So this was telling the whole story, really. We tried to do it with industrial detergents, your peracetic acid, your chlorines, etc. And we just couldn't get the resistance. We couldn't induce the resistance, even when we were going 1,000, 10,000 below where it was being used within industry. The only place that we could do it was on the SDS, so that's a detergent rather than a disinfectant, which was similar to what we were seeing in the domestic machines. But what I would say is the SDS industrial laundering is never used unless it's in conjunction with a disinfectant. So you've got that there. We did manage with the SDS to create 1 clinical resistance. But as I said, it would never be used on its own. But we are able to do this also with the SDS that is used within industrial laundries. So some of you in the room were actually involved in some research that we did with care homes, where we looked at, and I may have presented this last year actually, where we looked at what guidance and policy they needed. And a team of us through the IPS Care Home SIG created some guidance, which is now available on Skills for Care and the IPS website. But when we were doing that, so we had over 1,000 responses to surveys from care homes, we did focus groups, we did interviews with care homes, and we really looked at what policies, or support, should I say, what their policies are there, what support they needed, because they were saying HTM 104 wasn't suitable for their care home setting. And so a group of us over about 18 months developed guidance for care homes. But one of the things that come out of this was the fact that the bed changing policy really varied. So if it was soiled, most people, like if it's soiled, it was soiled. But other than that, no one really knew when beds were being changed. Some had a 4-day a week policy. So what we decided to see was how the microbiome built up in beds. So again, my poor team had to sleep on their bed sheets for up to a month and then wash them in washing machines that weren't necessarily working. And we had a look at how the microbiome was building up over that 4 weeks. So we took samples at 3 days, 1 week, 2, 3, and 4 weeks. I'll tell you what, by the time those bed sheets had finished, we were all just like, just get them off. And what we found was we looked at viable counts of what the bacteria is building up at our feet, at our hips and our heads. And we tried to establish if there was a questionnaire on cleaning, if you had to shower before bed, if you were wearing pyjamas, those types of things. But what was really interesting was we did this for bacteria and fungi, is that actually you reach the peak point of microbial build-up at 3 days. And then even though you get to a month, it's the same level. So it's a turnover of bacteria. Now, that's not to say for any stretch of the imagination we'd be leaving it for a month because we've got bed mites and skin and everything else. But what I am saying is within 3 days, your bed's colonised. And it's the same with the fungi and the bacteria. Ladies, we're a bit cleaner than the men, but I think we all knew that. So men tend to have a bigger build-up, particularly in that first few days. And oops, the colonisation is there. And so then we started to look at what bacteria was there, and we found over 1,251 different bacterial species there, but it remained pretty stable. So in a healthy person like us, once we've established that our bed's colonised after 3 days, it remains there. But how this would play into a vulnerable patient, but we would say that the 4th day is when bed sheets need changing, after 4 days really. And then the fungi was the same, 293, fungal species were identified. So we had a lot of bacteria going on. So conclusions then, microorganisms are able to survive on textiles. Domestic washing machines don't necessarily perform, and we've got no idea if they do or they don't. The washing machines are able to harbour antimicrobial resistant microorganisms, and actually not using the correct concentration of domestic detergents can create antibiotic resistance, which could be taken back into the healthcare environment. And that really we'd recommend bed sheets are laundered on day 4. And we're going to be looking at how we can distribute that soon. But we're still working on this study because we're going to look at how bed making introduces microorganisms to the environment.